So, what happens when a faith that was born in the wilderness finally has to be lived out in the real world, in the Promised Land? Well, that's the story we're diving into today, the Book of Joshua. It all begins with two simple, earth-shattering words. Moses is dead. Think about that. For 40 long years, his voice, well, it was like the voice of God. He was the lawgiver, the leader, the prophet, and now he's gone. But the story, it doesn't end there. It can't. Because God's purpose, you see, is always bigger than any one person. And so, the book of Joshua picks up right where Deuteronomy left off. The people, they're the same. God is the same. And his promises, they're still the same. The law has been given, right? The foundation has been laid. But now everything is about to be put to the test. And that really brings us to the central question of this entire book. Now that all the rules for the nation have been written down, will they actually live by them? You see, what was promised in theory now has to be walked out in reality. God made the promise. Now, obedience has to be the answer. So God speaks directly to the new leader Joshua, and he gives him this command over and over: be strong and courageous. Now, this isn't a command to just not be afraid. God knows fear is a part of the journey. No, it's a command to act, even when you are afraid, to act in spite of it. You see, leadership in this story really requires two things, and you absolutely cannot separate them. First, there's morale. That courage to lead even when the fear is just overwhelming. And second, there's morality, which is just absolute, unwavering obedience to God's commands. Because think about it, strength without holiness, that's just chaos. And holiness without courage, well, it's powerless. And then something really beautiful happens. It's a confirmation. Joshua, he speaks to the people, and they echo God's own words right back to him. It's this incredible picture, isn't it? His calling comes first from God, from above, but then it's affirmed by the community right there around him. All right, so there it is. The promised land is right in front of them, but it's not empty. And right away, there's this massive obstacle, the Jordan River. And it's at flood stage. It's completely impassable. And this is where we learn something so important about faith. Faith doesn't pretend obstacles aren't there. No, it walks right toward them. So what does Joshua do? He sends 2 spies into the fortress city of Jericho. And where do they find safety? Of all places, in the home of a prostitute named Rahab. I mean, this is a woman who's completely outside the covenant, outside the people of God. And yet, she has faith. And just listen to the certainty in her voice. She doesn't say, I think God will give you this land, or I hope he will. No, she says, I know the Lord has given you this land. It's incredible. Her faith sees the final outcome before the first step is even taken. She literally risks her life on what she knows. And because of that, she's promised salvation. Then comes that moment of truth, back at the river. The priests, they're carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and they step right into the raging water. And it's then, and only then, that the waters stop. Not a second before, not a second after, but at the precise moment of obedience. You see, the last generation, they had only heard the stories of the Red Sea parting. This new generation, they had to see it for themselves. It's such a powerful reminder. Faith has to be experienced. It can't just be inherited. So they're across the river. And there it is, the great fortress of Jericho, just waiting. But before the battle begins, there's a really crucial lesson to be learned about what kind of war this actually is. Because it's not what they think it is. Joshua is out there scouting the city, and suddenly he's confronted by a man with a drawn sword. And Joshua asks the most human question you could possibly imagine. He says, are you for us, or are you for our enemies? Are you on our side or their side? The answer he gets is a single, stunning word. No. And that one word, it changes everything. The commander of the Lord's army, he isn't here to take Israel's side. He's here to take command. And this is the shift. The great question is never, is God on my side? The only question that ever matters is, am I on his? And the battle plan that God gives them for Jericho just proves this point completely. I mean, it's not a military strategy at all. It's a ritual of obedience. March in silence, circle a wall, blow some horns. To the outside world, this looks completely foolish.
But so often, faith does look like foolishness. And here, that kind of radical obedience is the only key that can unlock divine power.
So after this impossible victory at Jericho, you'd think they'd be unstoppable. But then comes this shocking defeat at a tiny little village called Ai. And why? Because of a hidden sin. One man, a man named Achan, had secretly disobeyed God's command. And his story, it reveals a really difficult truth for all of us. Sin is never, ever truly private. One person's secret compromise can put the entire community in danger.
But let's back up for a second, because before any of these battles, God instructed them to do something that had absolutely nothing to do with military strategy or weapons. It had everything to do with memory.
Remember when they crossed the Jordan? Well, from that dry riverbed, they took 12 stones, one for each tribe, and they built a monument. And its only purpose was to make future generations ask a question, to have kids look at it and say, hey, what do these stones mean? It was designed so that the story of God's faithfulness would have to be told again and again and again. Because here's the thing, a faith that isn't actively remembered will eventually be passively forgotten. And forgetting what God has done, that's always the first step toward disobedience. Those stones were like a physical anchor for a spiritual memory. And then another big shift happens. The manna, that supernatural bread from heaven that fed them for 40 years in the wilderness, it just stopped. But this wasn't God abandoning them, not at all. It was more like a graduation. God was training them to live from the fruit of the very land he had given them. He was teaching them to take responsibility. So the book comes to a close with an old Joshua gathering the entire nation one last time. He's led them to victory after victory in battle. But he knows, the real war, the war for their hearts and their loyalty, that's a battle that never, ever ends. He reminds them of everything God has done for them, and then he lays out the choice that every single generation has to face. Who will you serve? And he doesn't even wait for their answer. He makes his own stand for everyone to hear. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And the story ends with a series of funerals. Joshua is buried. The high priest is buried. The bones of Joseph, carried all this way from Egypt, are finally laid to rest. That founding generation, they're all gone. And we're left with this chilling final verdict from the text. After them arose another generation who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. The land was conquered, the promise was kept, but that generation forgot. It proves that faith can't be inherited like a piece of land. It has to be chosen. It has to be remembered. It has to be experienced by each new heart. Which leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it?